Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So our talk today is about computational biology. I might just ask for the clicker from the lovely organizers. Thank you so much. Yeah, so classically, computational biology has been known as an intersection of computer science, biology, and big data. The field has foundations in mathematics, chemistry, and genetics, and this has often been used to understand more about biological systems, relationships, and to imagine possible futures. Today, we have the amazing Lyndsey Walsh and Sam Balfus with us, and they're going to talk a little bit about how they use technology in their practice and in their interactions and expressions of nature, humanity, and biology. So we are already introed. So to jump right in, can you both explain a little bit about your practices?
So I work a lot with mostly living materials, like stem cells and cancer cells and genetically modified organisms, but also these intersections between living organisms and technology and how they intersect, either with genetic engineering or with biomedical research, and then those social and ethical implications of this kinds of research in our daily lives and seeing how it impacts culture and questioning it as well.
Yeah, I work a lot with VR and traditional techniques like drawing and sculpture, and I'm a big nerd and I'm very into world building. So I've started building my own sort of universe with its own kind of logic and physics and lots of abstract shapes that populate the universe.
And what was your journey coming to create art like this? Because obviously both of you have very specific kind of niches that you go into, and you explore different biological concepts or nature concepts, and you mix it with your art practice. So what drew you to doing that?
So I've always been really fascinated between the intersections between art and living systems, and for a long time I didn't really know that this was like a field of research that could be explored, and so I kind of started working with whales and their anatomies and realizing how they didn't really taxonomically make sense within our understanding of evolution, and looking at their skulls as if they were sculpture and trying to put it in a more postmodern analysis to see if that would change how scientific knowledge was perceived and understood. And ever since then, I kind of took off working with stem cells and cancer cells and all these other things.
Yeah, and I kind of came up through fantasy and graffiti and a lot of sort of gestural stuff and thinking about made-up language and things like that. So after going to art school and being able to play with a lot of fancy toys like 3D printers and virtual technology, I started to just have a lot of fun making up lore behind the work that I was making, and that kind of developed into this made-up universe.
And so with you, Lyndsey, a lot of your work, you've said, kind of falls into the spectrum of being on the uncanny end of things. And Sam, a lot of your work goes more into the sublime. What draws both of you to each of those areas?
Yeah, for the uncanny with me, I'm really interested in the ways how life in the laboratory and also life under the impact of technology kind of unsettles these boundaries and binaries and also generates these monsters that really challenge the way we culturally perceive the world. And so I find myself really drawn to the stories of these monsters, both as they emerge in the laboratory, but also within ourselves, as we increase in our use of genetic testing for ourselves, or increasing different kinds of disease narratives that we have based on genetic-based diseases, and also through smell technologies and things like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also definitely into monsters in the same way, but maybe from a different angle. Like, I think a lot of the sublime work that you talk about, it's fun for me to like get into a space with 3D modeling where I can make something that I think is really beautiful but also really scary at the same time. So just kind of finding the balance between those two things in my own sort of visual lexicon.
And so, Lyndsey, a lot of your practice takes experiences from family members who have gone through cancer and kind of having genetic markers within your own biology that say you potentially could have this one day. And a lot of your art pieces center around like growing cancer cells or talking about it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so especially within the realm of computational biology, I deal a lot with that in my own personal life, where I have this genetic mutation that gives me hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome, and I've been giving a diagnosis of basically 94% chance of getting breast cancer, which is odds you don't want to bet against. And so I've created this work called Self-Care, where I've really challenged these notions of care and also our relationship to building disease narratives. Been looking at a lot of mutational identity theory with that and seeing myself less as this pre-Viver narrative that exists within these emerging genetic identities and more as how mutantness can be explored for these emerging disease narratives. And I challenged myself to try to take care of this cancer that I will potentially eventually have through this wearable binder that has living breast cancer cells with the same genetic mutation I have. And I use my own body heat to keep them warm, and I have to feed them. And so making kind of kin with this monster that's supposed to live inside me and that I've watched my mother have cancer as well has been kind of an interesting part of my work.
I thought it was really interesting too before we kind of touched on a little bit of the idea of body horror, and you mentioned that you worked with a scent expert as well, and I can see that on here we have one of the perfumes that you made. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we often don't think about it, but our perception of other people's smells have this biological basis for health. We want to know when people maybe have different illnesses and things like this, and diseases all have smells. Even if we can't smell them, other organisms can. And so this was a project I did with the University of the Underground that's kind of evolved, and I was working with a scientist at MIT named Dr. Andreas Merschen, who's invented a machine that can smell different diseases. And I attempted to prototype basically like a designer perfume of smell of this genetic disease called trimethylaminuria, which makes people smell like fish. And so this is my first perfume and hopefully a collection of different smells of diseases as well.
And how, when you show this off, do you allow people to smell it? Like, is it sprayed in the air for people to smell?
Yeah, so there'll usually be one bottle that's like the exhibition artifact that no one can touch for insurance reasons, and then there'll be a smaller one with a sample that people can then smell and interact with, which is quite nice.
Do you think that explorations like what you do could change or inspire things within the medical industry?
I hope so in some cases. Like I am a patient at a cancer center, and when I became a patient there, I also submitted my artistic portfolio because I was asking them to be part of my artwork, and they thought the project was really interesting and had all these important, very concerns about ethics and patient care. And I've interviewed a lot of different medical professionals in the Russian Federation and in Finland and in the US and things like that. And it's all a very important issue, but it's like about how these ideas are explored, and the autoethnography behind it I think is greatly valued and something that they take with them from the work. But yeah, I've yet to see massive impacts.
Sure. And Sam, with your work, you've got a fantastical realm called the Sacy world, which you mentioned before, and you're exploring the sublime, but also creating your own digital world. There's a whole ecosystem there. You're in the midst of creating a language. A lot of it you've made already. And then you also have interplay between different species. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, as I said, I started kind of from graffiti, so there's a lot of just abstract shapes and gestural shapes. and these kind of developed into little creatures. And these creatures I call slollas, S-L-O-L-L-A-S, and they are the sort of people in the Sacy world. Each one of them is an abstract shape, and they act sort of as their own language. They each kind of embody an emotion or a riff or a phrase, and there's other creatures in the Sacy world, like big, giant ones that sort of are ancient and powerful, like dragons, but all sort of with this abstract kind of presentation. And yeah, there's a lot of different environments in the Sacy world. There's scary ones and beautiful ones and hot ones and cold ones and ones made of cheese and ones made of ice, and it's kind of fun to just whatever I'm feeling that day, like put it into the Sacy world and then try to create lore around it. And these slollas, which are the experiencers of this fantastical world, can interact with each other and with the greater or lesser beings in the Sacy world, and just sort of I can come up with fun ways to explore that idea.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little bit about goon trapping? Because
Goon
that
trapping?
also exists in the Sacy world,
Yeah,
right?
goon trapping is so there are these creatures called goon trappers, and they're like the bounty hunter creatures of the Sacy world who are sort of anthropomorphized, and they hunt and trap goons, which are embodiments of various ailments and diseases and terrible events. So they kind of come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are anthropomorphized, and some of them are completely abstract, and some of them can be clouds or grass or whatever. And there's that kind of dichotomy between the goons and goon trappers. And as I sort of build the lore, the goon trappers are part of a larger project, not just the Sacy world, but the Gooniverse, which is a project that I make up with my good friends back in LA. And we have a band, and we make sort of music and art around and inside of the Gooniverse. So yeah, the Goon Trappers, my band is supposed to be Goon Trappers in the Gooniverse, and we play as if we are inside of it already.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of this world that you've created online interacts so easily with the outside world as well, and there's really a conversation back and forth between them.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm. And with the language that you're currently building, I know you've said that you have a lot of the vocabulary created, and now you're kind of moving on to the grammar stage. Can you tell us a bit about that? It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to now as it's not quite developed yet. But yeah, there's like words for a lot of things, words for grass and sky and feelings, and words around relationships, words around like the type of food that these creatures consume. And now I'm trying to string it together, just doing a lot of research with taking inspiration from Tolkien and, a lot of Noam Chomsky, and just like a lot of linguistic YouTube channels and stuff like that. So it's really fun, and it's really interesting, yeah.
Nice. And in these worlds, you're able to use different assets like 3D plants, animals, trees, etc. And a lot of these assets all have their own quote-unquote biology, which is made of code, but it's very much a different sort of code than what genetic beings have in this world. And I was wondering, because you make your own physics for these things, you can kind of augment these items in whichever way you like. What's the line for you with balancing putting these things in there in a way that people can recognize and relate to versus launching into the fantastical kind of end of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I definitely like to start. I have a lot of fun making just beautiful environments before they get fantastical and weird. So, I'll make a ground and put grass on it and have a sky, and things like that are pretty traditional in the sense of like depicting landscapes. But at the same time, I have a lot of freedom to take a plant and have it hover in the middle of the world if I want to, or like have a lake and create physics settings that make the lake behave in a way that it certainly wouldn't in real life. So that's a lot of fun for me.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I guess with this world building, do you foresee, like especially in the digital realm in this way, do you foresee that this can help inspire ways that we treat the real world in whatever way that could be an outcome? Like whether it's like landscaping or, how we plant trees and interact with them and bring more nature into the world.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. I think because what I'm doing is so like reaching for something that I don't think I've like seen before, or lush grass in places that wouldn't have it normally or something like that. There's like a longing there, and it's not so much a desire to communicate the importance of the environments I'm building so much as just like getting a chance to play in them myself. So I think it's like a difficult balance. I'm not going to say that I am saving the environment by doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Do you ever think that, are you ever concerned that there could be a potential future where in this world the environment is, continually being damaged by climate change and we kind of lose a lot of the basic ecology that we currently have, and we're kind of forced to retreat into the digital realm and experience nature and biology and ecosystems there?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope not. I think with the major things we face, like global warming or other various massive threats to humanity and our ecology, it's important for us to be thinking about those things. But at the same time, I hope that we can process this type of art from a place of comfort and openness, and not from one of fear and trying to get back to a place that we no longer can enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Lyndsey, what are some things that you would hope for in not only the medical industry, but kind of the intersection that you reside in?
You mean in terms of like between technology and nature?
Yeah, kind of the conversation that they have, like the way that they play together, the way that we interact with technology, maybe specifically in the field that you inhabit.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest points is like really critically analyzing the optimism behind technology, because I think we oftentimes see technology as like the savior for ourselves. For example, I work with genetically modified algae, and I have this, this work where I've basically made a genetic engineering facility inside a museum, so I could put some genetically modified algae waste into the museum, so trash. But this is like discussing sort of the ideas about green chemistry and how algae as a biofuel is really seen as this green energy resource, when in reality, because we're genetically modifying it and the laws around genetic modifications in Germany are quite, they're extremely strict. There's also a large amount of plastic waste that occurs within these processes as well in the lab, and really critically looking at what does sustainability really mean, and what are these ideas that we're putting our hopes and dreams behind, and are they actually sustainable, or are there better alternatives that we could look at? For example, like rethinking our notions of consumerism and rethinking how we associate our markets with capitalism as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Do you think recyclability plays a huge part in that as well? Because I think something that I've noticed in my work, especially surrounding fashion things, is buying less has been kind of what people have been trying to communicate and trying to move the general vibe towards for so long. And we've seen that with like Shein and like a lot of other fast fashion brands, it's been very hard to break that consumeristic mindset. And it's also been, I think exacerbated even by platforms like TikTok or Instagram, like this continuous run of new things and new trends. And in fashion at least, like recyclability is so talked about, but it's also so difficult to attain because, for example, every material that you use, if there's like a small percentage of something that's not recyclable in there, or it's like sewn with thread that can't be recycled, you actually can't recycle that garment, so it's very difficult. But what are your thoughts on recyclability with like energy sources or ideas of stuff like that?
Yeah, so with living materials, I think we see it as like, because living materials can be renewed and turned over and things like this, we see a lot of living materials as this never-ending renewable resource as well. But there's a lot of, like, we can deplete the nutrients of a landscape for agriculture quite easily, and our current industrial farming methods do that all the time, as well as there's a lot of ideas about like lab-grown meat is a big one within sort of the field of bioart and biodesign, and that we could take cells from other organisms and use them perpetually. But in reality, a lot of lab-grown meat uses something called fetal bovine serum, which is basically the serum that's derived from the blood of aborted baby cows, for lack of a better word. And so you end up killing a lot more animals to make, for example, one lab-grown meat patty versus just killing a cow and making lots of patties of meat. So I think really putting into context what these hopes and promises are, because we're so hopeful, which is lovely, and we should be hopeful about the future, and we should be using technology to find new ways to move forward that are sustainable, but we really need to think about what are we putting our hopes and dreams behind, and is it worth it, is it right, and how should we do that?
That's so interesting about the vegan patty, actually. I don't think I quite clocked that or knew that until now.
Totally.
And I think that, yeah, it just goes to show what marketing, the downsides of what marketing can do within structures that we have today. But I have another question for both of you. What are some interesting new tools or developments out there that you're quite excited about?
Yeah, I think the big one is AI, for sure. Everybody's definitely coming across it in their own way. And I think for people like all three of us who it's emerging as an insane game-changing tool. I definitely stopped rendering for quite a while when I was just fascinated by Midjourney, and people have a lot of qualms about that, which are reasonable. But the idea that I just get to sit down and type something and iterate ideas very quickly is super attractive. And I think people are coming up with new ways to incorporate it into their work. And there's a lot of problems with it, but it's still super young and baby, so I'm pretty excited to see where it goes, especially in terms of, or in the context of 3D work.
Maybe quickly on that, with Midjourney in particular, do you think that it can be quite fun or an interesting experiment to collaborate with it in that way? Because if you're 3D rendering something, you are specifically placing each item where you want it to be and putting the physics in exactly whatever plans you want. But with Midjourney and other text-to-image platforms, there's this feeling of collaboration or a mystery or surprise where you don't know exactly what you're going to get, even if you are very specific.
Yeah, totally. You said it well. It's like the surprise, seeing what it's going to do, hoping that you can get close to something that you have in your head, if you do have something in your head, and if you don't, seeing where it takes you, definitely. I know, Lyndsey, you've done some amazing work with DALL-E and other AI image generation models as well.
Yeah, no, I think for this like digital component, it's really interesting to see how AI looks at our world and puts in inputs and values, especially into our own creative practices, and how we can rethink certain things through AI as well. But another technology I think that is really changing the ways that we see what life is like. I mean, CRISPR has been around for a while now, but I was just in a fellowship on human reproduction with Ionian University and taboo transcendence and transgressions in Corfu, and the idea that, I mean, babies have been edited, genetically edited and born in China now, and like the idea that we can change what humanity is and start exploring artificial wombs and things like that, I think is something that's also biotechnologically really changing how we see living systems and how we see what is a natural process, because oftentimes we remove ourselves from nature, but we're now changing the means in which nature can occur as well and what natural can be. And maybe AI will genetically engineer the future of humanity. Who knows?
Yeah, totally.
Who knows? Only time will tell.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that what you said about just that we are changing our genetic makeup is quite interesting. Obviously, we've been doing this with like things we've been eating for a long time. We've also cloned animals for a while, even though it's been banned in a lot of places. But yeah, I think that's a really good thing for us all to think about and leave on. I think we're running out of time, but yeah, any final words?
Yeah, I'm very thankful to get this opportunity to talk to you guys. Thanks for having us, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, same from me. Thank you all for being here, and connect with us if you ever want to talk about stuff.
Yeah.